Beloved of God, this afternoon we take time to remember our beloved colleagues who have finished their course of life and faith, who now rest from their labors and have received the great reward. In loving memory, we give thanks to God as we celebrate the witness of Bishop Carlton P. Minnick Jr., Bishop Joseph C. Humper. We remember our beloved colleagues, and we celebrate the witness of these faithful disciples of Jesus Christ. At this time, I invite Bishop Hope Morgan Ward and Bishop Warner Brown Jr. to come and offer a testimony, a witness to their lives.
What an honor to have a moment to speak a word of witness to the life of Carlton Prentice Minnick Jr. The Lord is my shepherd. I drink living water. I feast at God's table. I do not fear. Psalm 23 was Bishop Minnick's favorite text, and he lived well into this text as a sheep of God's fold and as a shepherd of God's people. We have to give thanks to God for Mary Ann Minnick, who lured him from the Baptist fold into the Methodist fold when they were teenagers, and they were married at the age of 18. After remarkably effective ministry in the Virginia Conference, Bishop Minnick was elected to the episcopacy 44 years ago in 1980. Some of us in the room were small children. Some of us were teenagers or college students. Some of us were young in ministry, and some were colleagues of Bishop Minnick. In Bishop Minnick, we saw the great possibility of being both sheep of God's fold and shepherds of God's flock. Together, beautifully, artfully, and boldly, and humbly. When Bishop Minnick was elected to the episcopacy, he was first assigned to the Mississippi Conference for 4 years. And it was then our delight in the North Carolina Conference, where I then served, to receive him as our bishop. My first memory of him is clear and still instructive all these years later. A gathering of clergy, and the few clergy women sort of migrated over to a table looking for mutual support and community together. And we sat down with lunches. There weren't many of us those many years ago. We started to engage in conversation, and we looked up, and here comes our brand new bishop with his lunch, heading to our table, He did not go to the table of the large church pastors or the high salary pastors or the general conference delegates or the conference staff. He came to our table first. And he sat with us and asked us our names, asked us about our churches, asked us about our families. What sort of bishop is this? He taught me about the crozier and what it means to bear the crozier. He taught me in that moment, and he mentored us year after year in servant leadership in our churches and our districts and our conference across the general church, and even into this room as servant leaders. He was an absolutely delightful person. He and Mary Ann loved to dance. He delighted in his children and his grandchildren. He loved to share jokes, and he loved Duke basketball. Such joy in his family life. You appear at the door and knock on it. His first words were, "Come see Mary Ann." And you'd go in and sit down to talk. Even in aging and diminishment of his own sight, he loved to listen to audible books and to listen to Duke basketball. I visited him not very long ago, and he said, I just listened to the boys from Biloxi, and I know you know about Biloxi too. You got to read that book. He's commending books to me with diminished sight, having listened to them on Audible. and always listening to ACC basketball, especially toward Durham. And always redirecting concern. How are you feeling, Bishop Minnick? Oh, I'm not that interesting, but you tell me about you. What are you up to? He always would redirect to the person in front of him. Before his funeral in Raleigh, I asked several people about their memories of Bishop Minnick, and one, many of you know, Belton Joyner, simply said, he was a man beyond his time. I added that to biblical language. He was a prophet. He was a person before his time. He saw where God was headed and lived in that direction. It was his destiny and his heart song. And now, being older and wiser and having dealt with some of the issues that we deal with as bishops, I realized it was sometimes his heartache to share God's expansive love for all people in all places. He was unhindered by resistance. He was BIPOC-oriented before there was BIPOC, appointing Black, Indigenous, people of color in appointments. In Mississippi in the mid-'80s, he appointed Mary John Dye, a white clergywoman, to a historically African-American church in the Mississippi Delta. In North Carolina, he appointed the first women and people of color to the cabinet and to conference leadership. He longed for the church to move forward, and perhaps his favorite sermon illustration was the church that moved. In Swan Quarter, North Carolina, there's a historical marker, and it marks a great event. There was a church who needed to relocate and would not. They would walk up to it and then back up, time and time again. Well, one September came and one of those hurricanes roared into eastern North Carolina and flooded the streets of Swan Quarter and flooded the church and picked up that church, and you know the rest of the story. It floated that church down the street and plopped it down on the very place the church had considered and rejected. Bishop Minnick believed that God was going to take the church forward. And he wanted all leaders, clergy and lay, to be people who lean toward God's future, to also be people before their time. He teaches me now in my own retirement. He was the happiest retiree I have ever known. At his retirement party at annual conference, the Duke Blue Devil danced down the aisle. And I can't even begin to tell you what it takes to get the Blue Devil to do something like that. He danced along with the Blue Devil. Always a wonderful teacher, he anticipated his new calling at Duke Divinity School, and there would continue to be a man beyond his time, teaching and mentoring a whole generation of divinity students. And he was on the task force and one of the leaders and prime spokespeople of it that led to Duke Chapel opening to celebrations of same-sex unions in December 2000, 24 years before General Conference in Charlotte. He is indeed a blessed memory to us. Bishop Fairley comments, Bishop Minnick ordained me and I'll always remember. Bishop McAlilly says, Bishop Minnick gave me hope and inspired me to creativity and courage as a young pastor. I've never forgotten. Bishop Leland added, Bishop Minnick will always be my bishop. Becky Youngblood, a young pastor in Mississippi, young in ministry when Bishop Minnick was appointed there, texted me, he remains for me an example of embodied servant ministry. John Chrysostom wrote many, many, many years ago, those we love and lose are no longer where they were. They are now everywhere we are. I've never forgotten. I'll always remember. He remains for me. CP Minnick's memory lives and grows in us. Thanks be to God for all that he was and for all that he still is with us, in us now. A blessed memory, both sheep and shepherd, husband, father, grandfather, teacher, mentor, friend, pastor, visionary, prophet, and crozier bearer. A person beyond his time. May the same be said of us.
Amen.